Okay. Sorry, Your Honor. Okay, good afternoon, Detective Tomaino. You testified on direct that the sexual assault nurse told you that there had been prior instances of sexual assault?
I was not told directly by her, no. What I received was the reports after the fact.
Okay. You're talking specifically about her report and the transcription of her audio interview with Ms. McInday?
I believe she actually had a written report that identified what the injuries were.
What the injuries were, and you're saying on that report there was a mention of prior sexual assault? Not prior domestic violence, but prior sexual assault?
I'm not certain.
Okay, so you want to walk back the statement that you had known about prior sexual assault through the nurse examiner?
I'm aware of whatever was in that report.
Well, do you want to review the whole report for an absence of mention of prior sexual assault?
Sure.
Approach?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor.
I'm so sorry, may I see what report you're referring to?
It's the same report, the entirety of it,
With the transcription?
with transcription.
Okay. All right, can we approach very quickly while he's reviewing that report?
Come on up. He's done reading it.
Oh, I'm sorry. And are you able to state now whether there was an allegation of prior sexual assault made to the nurse examiner?
I didn't read that report. I never received that particular report.
That would be no.
Not by this one, no.
Thank you. Is there another report from that nurse?
What I had read from Detective Lafreniere and what I had read from another report was that there were previous, but that was well after the fact and well after my investigation was pretty much concluded.
Was it before you submitted charges?
Not at all.
It was after you submitted charges?
Long after, because on the date of incident, they hadn't even been able to identify exactly what the extent of her injuries were. And the SA exam wasn't completed until after Detective Lafreniere had actually shown up to conduct the initial investigation and interview with her. And then he contacted Nurse Jerry to arrive and conduct the SANE exam. So that initial report wasn't made available to me for the initial injuries, and the SANE exam wasn't available to me until long after. I was recovering different bits and pieces of medical examinations and whatnot over the next coming weeks.
Okay. So tell me if this is fair to say, and if it's not, correct it. Even though you had already submitted the case for filing and charges, you were still collecting evidence to see either if there should be additional charges, different charges, dismissed charges, and also putting evidence together for the district attorney to prosecute?
I was collecting it for her. I wasn't collecting it for myself at that point in time. The case had basically I'd already sent the case over with the initial PC, which identified, I don't remember how many charges, 7 or 8 charges.
Right.
By PC, you mean?
Probable cause? Sorry, ma'am.
I know, but
Sorry.
yours may not.
Okay, so, and obviously you were reading the reports to see their relevance and to be able to discuss them with the district attorney?
No, I really wasn't looking for the relevance at that point. I'd already submitted my case to the district attorney's office for them to be able to review anything further. So at that point in time, I was just collecting and trying to identify anything that it was that the district attorney would need that I'd already asked for, and then anything else that was in a request for further from the district attorney's office. And honestly, I don't remember a Rose Hart thing that I had recovered. I recovered the one that was from Sunrise Hospital, the medical records that were specific to the injuries, not to the SANE exam.
Gotcha. Okay. Did you discuss potential charges with Detective Lafreniere?
I really don't remember if I did or did not. I relied on his expertise. I'd been out of the field for at least 2.5 years at that time. And it was more of an identifying exactly what it was that he'd actually found in his interview after the fact. And I wanted to know if I was appropriate. If I remember correctly, I was looking for the appropriateness of what the charge was at the time. And I think I ended up with open and gross lewdness based on what he was telling me.
Well, and he being Detective
Lafreniere.
And so you charged, you recommended a charge of open and gross lewdness?
Correct.
Which is, correct me if I'm wrong, that's a gross misdemeanor?
Can be.
Did you recommend an attempted murder charge on Mr. Thomas?
I did.
You did?
Sorry, not on Mr. Thomas. No.
On Mr. Thomas as
No,
well?
I did not. Sorry.
Okay. And so the next question, you recommended an attempted murder charge on Ms. McInday?
Not on Miss McInday, but on the defendant for Miss McInday. yes.
Right, okay. Bad question, thank you. And the recommendation was based on the statement of Ms. McInday that the defendant said he was going to finish her off and went downstairs and she heard knives rustling?
More than that, but that's part of it.
least at the beginning portions of your investigation, did you interview Mr. Copenhagen?
I did not.
Okay. Subsequent to your initial reports, did you write any other reports and send them along to the district attorney?
Later on, I did an officer's report, yes.
Other than that one report, anything else?
Not that I can remember.
And that, just to make sure we're talking about the same report, that's like one piece of paper.
It was one page. It could be longer, but that was one page, if I remember correctly.
How many times did you interview Ms. McInday?
None.
None?
None.
Okay, so you weren't able to go back. Let me back up. I think you testified that you weren't able to interview her when she arrived at the hospital because of basically the nature of her injuries. She was unable to communicate in a manner that would have been productive for your investigation.
For me, no. I could barely understand her. It was difficult to get what I was going to be looking for. And I'm not patrol, so I don't need to have it done in a particular amount of time. So my goal was basically to make her comfortable as possible before conducting an actual on-tape interview with her. Hopefully that her swelling had gone down and she was able to talk a little bit more articulately for me, so that at time then when there was actual court going to for the case to actually go to court, that it would be something that people would be able to understand.
Okay, and so did you end up not interviewing her because Detective Lafreniere did?
Yes,
And you relied on his report?
absolutely.
But there is a distinction in Metro between domestic violence and the sex unit, and each unit is sort of looking for different information. Is that correct?
There was. We no longer have the domestic violence detail. It's gone.
Okay. At the time, on August 8th of 2014, right, there was. You mean on that date there was?
There is a distinction, yes.
So, all right, so the charges were based on the report of the Sexual Assault Division, specifically Detective Lafreniere, and not based on a domestic violence report.
It was based on both, because I had, when I submitted the arrest warrant, it was based on two reports that were completed by patrol, one for Corey's case, 0494, and one for Ms. McInday's case, which was 0491. And I included those in the arrest report, identifying specifically what patrol put in there into the arrest report. So that established the actual domestic batteries. As far as the sexual assault was concerned, that was based solely on his interview, which was done in a manner that was specific to sexual assault.
Okay, now having looked at you're talking about the patrol report with respect to Ms. McInday that was completed by then Officer Schumacher. I've forgotten her. It's Schumacher on all the reports, but
I see what?
Shepard. Thank you, Your Honor. Officer Shepard.
Okay.
Do you recall that being the report that you relied upon?
I relied on one that was identified specifically as Schumacher at the time, and the other one I believe was Truax.
Right, but the Truax report was specific to Corey Thomas, was it not?
I believe so. I can't remember which one was which, but one did one report and one did the other.
Okay. And is it fair to say then Officer Schumacher's report was very short, barely over a paragraph?
Was.
And so that was the domestic violence information upon which you based the warrants?
The initial portion, yes.
I'm sorry, you said you came in on a day off to get a warrant. Was that over the weekend, or was that Monday that you spoke about?
On Saturday. The
On
very
Saturday.
next day I came in the morning to type up the report and to type up the arrest warrant. And that was to include both reports and his interview of Ms. McInday. Detective Lafreniere's interview of Ms. McInday.
Understood. But you said the warrant wasn't, you used the term walk through. It wasn't walked through until Monday?
Cannot. Courts are closed, DA's office closed, can't do anything with that yet.
Right, I was going to ask you to explain what walk through means,
Sorry.
because that's a term of art.
You want me to do that again?
Yeah, no, I know what walk through means, but I don't know that the jury does. Can you explain that?
Sure. So for normal warrants, we submit the case directly to the DA's office. It goes through an envelope from myself through over to the screening DAs, and they look at all of our cases. They look at every one of the warrants that we're submitting on. At the moment in time when this case would go on, or a similar case, we do what is known as a walkthrough. They're very rare because you're basically interrupting the entire chain that goes on inside the DA's office behind the scenes, where each case gets to the next portion of a screening or to who's going to disseminate it to which DA. So we take a case by case. This was a case that actually warranted us being able to walk it through straight from our office over to the DA's office, and then have it walk through the chain, and then have them approve immediately by screening the warrant itself. And at that moment in time, it becomes active, and we're able to put it into the NCIC, National Criminal Information Center, that goes all across the nation, so everybody realizes the fact that there's a warrant out for some particular individual. Is that
Yes,
okay?
except I had thought that NCIC was clearinghouse instead of
Is it
center.
in CJIS, National Crime Justice Information System? There we go.
No. NCIC,
Gotcha.
National Information Clearinghouse is the second C. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
It's the provider, that's the federal provider of information for
Right.
all law enforcement. And so I guess the import of that is then a warrant didn't go out until Monday for the incident that occurred, bless you, for the incident that occurred on Friday?
Correct. The warrant did not.
All right, nothing further, thank you.
Redirect?
Just briefly, thank you, Your Honor. Great, I just want to ask you a few questions. When you submit this case very quickly to the district attorney's office because of the reasons we spoke about on direct in regards to the danger associated, would that be correct?
That's correct.
Okay. When you submitted the case for approval by the district attorney's office, did you have a transcription of the interview that Nurse Dermanilian did of Ms. McInday during the sexual assault nurse examination?
I did not yet, no.
After you submitted the case to the district attorney's office, did that transcript come in?
Eventually.
And was the incident where the defendant had contact with Ms. McInday's vagina, was that discussed in depth during that sexual assault nurse examination?
It was.
And in reading that, had you received this transcript and known how it was described, would you have submitted as an open and gross lewdness or a sexual assault?
After reading it, it was penetration ever so slight for sexual assault. For open and gross, it just needed to be on top of the skin in a specific sexual area.
So for instance, if someone is unclothed and you touch the outside of their vagina, like the top of their vagina, and you do it for a sexual purpose, that would be an open and gross lewdness?
Yes, on the vulva or on the lips, yes.
Okay. But if you wipe past the labia majora, past the big lips, or put your hand, an intrusion however slight, that is then, you would then put a charge of sexual assault.
Yes, penetration ever so slight.
After reading the transcript of Ms. McInday's description of what the defendant did to her, is your testimony, had you had that in your possession, the charge would have been recommended as...
Objection, Your Honor, vague and ambiguous as to which transcript she's referring to.
It's the transcript that the defense gave the detective, which would be...
All right, so just re-ask the question and make it clear what you're talking about.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about.
Sure. Okay, so it's page 9 of the sexual assault nurse examination transcript.
Okay, go ahead.
Did you have the opportunity to read that when the defense just brought it up to you?
Yes,
Okay. And in that, do you see the part of the conversation that I'm discussing?
yes.
Is your answer still the same? That you would have...
That would have qualified, absolutely.
At the time you submit your charges to the district attorney's office, did you know the extensiveness of Ms. McInday's injuries?
I did not.
Did you know anything about like the fractures or the lacerated liver and those types of things?
I believe that they'd established that she had a lacerated liver and that I believe she needed surgery, or she may or may not need surgery for that. And they were still trying to establish some of the facial injuries and what had gone on to her ribs and to her leg.
Okay. And then by in the coming days or weeks, do you then get a full copy, or is a full copy provided of medical records from the hospital?
Eventually.
Now, after knowing the extensiveness of the injuries, can that impact what a proper charge is or the amount of charges?
The severity at that point in time, once I'm able to substantial bodily harm, that would completely change a lot of charges if they're not already included in my initial submission.
You stated at the beginning of your direct testimony that in order to submit a warrant for, or make an arrest for battery domestic violence, you have to establish three things: a relationship between the parties. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a yes?
Yes.
And that a battery has happened.
Yes.
And that there has to be a 24-hour period if it's just a misdemeanor, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
At the time of your case, at the time you submitted the case, had you established that there was a relationship between Ms. McInday and the defendant?
That was my understanding, yes.
Showing you states 106, I don't need to make light of it, but pretty clear that a battery's occurred. Is that safe to say?
Safe.
And that it obviously had been within the past 24 hours and that it was a felony.
Objection leading, Your Honor. Not in the improper foundation.
Was it
Okay, so re-ask the question in proper form.
Was it within the last 24 hours?
Yes.
And so the three things that you need to do as a domestic violence detective, were those done?
Yes.
And was your case then submitted?
Yes.
Nothing further.
Cross.
1 second.
I'm confused. What beyond the Rose Hart, what you've referred to as the Rose Hart report, and what we referred to with the nurse examiner herself as the Rose Hart report, what beyond that did you review?
During that time, right, like when
Yeah,
I'm trying to make the submission?
No. In the weeks and months following the incident, what else did you review from the sexual assault nurse?
I believe I had gotten an email or some sort or something, or that it was basically identifying what it was, like a brief synopsis of what was supposed to have been in her report for Nurse Jerry, because for a while there, it was difficult to find whatever it was. I was sent on a mission to try to find the Rose Hart report, and I wasn't able to locate it. Somehow we ended up with it.
Okay, so there's an email somewhere floating around of a statement made by who you call Nurse Jerry.
It wouldn't be from her, no. I don't have any direct contact with her.
Okay, who would the email have been from?
I honestly, I don't remember. I don't remember.
Well, you just stated something about the difference between placing a hand on the vagina and penetrating the lips. And what appears to have changed between the Rose Hart report that you looked through before and what you just testified to on redirect is an email came to you that changed your perception. Is that correct?
Correct. At some point in time, I had received something that had identified that there was something else, but that was changing my mind after the fact, and I'm not looking to try to do new charges for this. This is stuff that is still me sending everything I possibly can over to the DA's office. It's not an active investigation for me anymore.
And you don't know who the email was from?
Do not.
From the hospital?
Not likely.
Okay.
Most likely it was from another detective of some sort that might have gotten, whoever, maybe it was the person who picked up, I'm speculating, I have no idea.
Well, was it do you know if it was an internal police memo? Something internal from Metro?
No.
No, you don't know, no, it wasn't.
No, it was not an internal document that was specific to identifying something in this. Because at the point in time when at this point in time, after I have submitted this case, it is now me just gathering evidence for prosecution. That's it. I'm not trying to add any charges. I'm not trying to add any more to the investigation for myself because I'm no longer involved in anything other than recovery. So I recovered lots of different things throughout this process and had lots of different, conversations with people. So.
Okay, but you reviewed something that discussed evidence that caused, at least in your mind, a change of charges, and that was forwarded on to the district attorney, correct?
Yes, but I never saw that. That's the Rose Hart document, and I didn't see that until you just presented it to me.
No, there was something beyond the Rose Hart document, which was an email with some sort of
Right.
discussion.
That's correct.
And you don't know where that is other than it was forwarded to the district attorney's office?
No, it'd be, I would have absolutely no idea because it wasn't something I looked at as evidence. It wasn't something, it was more like just simple conversation about, hey, this is kind of what's going on with this type stuff. If it was evidentiary in any way, shape, or form, I was doing my best to present this over for prosecution.
Okay. So it's fair to say then that if the email wasn't evidentiary, it could well have had a mistake in its interpretation of Nurse Jerry's report.
Could have.
You just read the entirety of Nurse Jerry's report, correct?
And I accept Nurse Sherry's report.
Right, which didn't say, which in fact said the contrary about penetration. Okay, and did he insert his fingers into the labial lips? Christine, no, he did not.
Page number, please.
They're not numbered.
They're not numbered.
Just let me see it and I'll find it. Page 10.
Thank you.
So, I'm sorry, did you answer that last question?
Not certain.
Or am I? You agree that that's what Nurse Jerry's report says?
In some portion of the report, yes.
Okay. Well, you just read the whole report. Nowhere in there does it say that penetration of the labial lips occurred, correct?
If you let me read it again, I can tell you if it does or does not.
We need to Rose Hart. He's asking for Rose Hart.
Yeah, the whole thing. I gave it, but we can't. Are these, are 9 and 10, are these the last two pages? Where? Okay, may I approach the witness?
Yes.
All right. Let's see if I can make this easier than the whole review. Okay. So there's this box that says penetration finger.
Okay.
And then you've read the rest. Or do you want to read the narrative?
I'd have to go through the narrative to be able to identify where I would identify something that would be penetration.
Okay. Please go ahead.
Okay.
Okay. So the question was, other than I guess the question was, why did you change your opinion after seeing that report?
Based on one statement that she says, I felt a saliva on my vagina.
On it doesn't mean in it, correct?
The vagina is between the lips. It is below the labia. So in order to touch that in any way, shape, or form, you have to get between the lips. Thus, penetration ever so slight.
Okay, but the actual statement when asked if anything past the big lips was no, it did not, correct?
That's what it says here, yes?
And you don't know whether Ms. McInday's definition of vagina was in the legal sense or in the common parlance, is that correct?
That would be correct. I did not speak with her.
Nothing further. Matt, Patrice?
Yes, go ahead.
Well, if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Lederman, yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, redirect?
Yeah, may I approach her?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, we got these. Flip it over for me. Thank you. So let me move positions because I don't want to have my back to the jury. All right, so in regards to the sexual assault nurse examination that we've been talking about, in regards to the paperwork, there is actually a document or a form that the nurse actually checks off. Is that correct?
To my knowledge, this is the first time I've actually ever seen rose hearts.
Okay, so I'm going to show you what's referred to as the medical history and assault information of the form.
Okay.
And there is an issue that there is a top of the form that says penetration, correct?
Yes.
And under that it says vaginal.
Yes.
So vaginal penetration, and what are the boxes that are checked?
Vaginal, yes. By finger.
Okay. So in the penetration portion of the examination the nurse did, she checked that there was vaginal penetration and it was done by the finger. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So now let's move on to the actual transcription of the sexual assault nurse examination done on the 8th between Nurse McInday and, Nurse Dermanillion and Miss McInday. And counsel, for the record, I'm referencing page 9. Is it true that during the transcription, Miss McInday states that he started at the very bottom near the hole and went up toward the top of my lips? And Nurse Dermanillion says, okay, so he went down to your rectum where you poop. Miss McInday says yes. Nurse Dermanillion says, then came up toward where you pee. And Miss McInday says yes. And then the nurse says, basically, that the hand is in between where you poop and pee. That's the vagina. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So this is a transcription that you did not receive as part of your records before you submitted the case.
That is correct.
Okay. Had you received these records before submitting the case to the district attorney's office, you would have, number one, on the form, would have you been able to see that Nurse Dermanillion checked that the victim had been penetrated by the defendant's finger?
I would have.
And would you have also seen the transcription that Miss McInday gave of the defendant licking his hand and where he touched?
I would have.
Okay. Would that have changed your opinion of putting a submission in for an open and gross lewdness?
Yes, it would.
Okay. Nothing else. Thank you, sir.
With a cross? It's all right.
When you read this transcription just a couple of minutes ago, did you see anywhere in there where it was described to Ms. McInday the difference between the common use of the word vagina and the legal description of penetration, however slight?
No.
Do you know what was in Ms. McInday's mind when she answered the question, when she was asked, okay, and did he insert his fingers into the labia lips, and she responded, no, he did not.
I have no idea what was in her mind.
And do you know, well, do you know what Ms. McInday's definition of vagina was when she was asked, was there a finger placed in the vagina, not inside? No. And then was there a finger to the outside? Yes. Do you know what those specifically meant?
Just based on what's stated in that report, that's it.
Well,
Otherwise, I would not be able to articulate anything any clearer than what that report states.
Okay, but it in itself, wouldn't you agree, is equivocal without knowing what Ms. McInday's definition of a vagina is?
It would be important, yes.
Nothing further.
Anything further?
Nothing, Your Honor, thank you.
Thank you, Detective. Appreciate it.
Thank you, stay close.